So one of the big realizations was there's no us and them. It's a hype. But there's only us. There's absolutely only us. We are all in the same boat, and the problem is never in the person. It's always between us. What some people refer to as trauma always occurs between two people.
Yeah. Oof, sorry.
Great. Well, we can get started.
Great, let's do it. So much richness here to get to.
I'm Andrew Feldmár. I'm a psychotherapist. I've been doing this, talking with people, for over 55 years. I was born in Hungary, but lived in Vancouver now for over 40 years. I have 2 children. I've been writing what I thought is important. I've been giving talks, led workshops. Like to leave some crumbs for people to find their way to what I have found my way to, even after I'm gone. So I like to leave trails of crumbs to follow the path.
Thanks. Yeah. Well, I hope that this can be, speaking of that, then may this also be, that would be our hope here, having been touched by your work, is to leave some crumbs, some, good quality sourdough crumbs on nice film to do that. So.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep, that's why we're here.
Well, I have a question straight away. If which is I'd love to just hear, what is that thing that you have, or what is a flavor of what you have learned, what you've come to, that we're leading crumbs to?
A couple of things. All my training that I got the degrees for that allow me to practice, never talked about it. I was never taught officially the most important things. So it's regrettable, but I think in the training of psychotherapists, the university education is simply for getting credentials. What is actually useful in the practice, one has to get elsewhere. And so in all my training, the problem that we were supposed to address was within the person. It's in the patient. The patient is suffering. There is something wrong with the patient. The therapist is supposed to help, and the therapist is supposed to know how to fix the patient. So in all the literature, right up to date in psychiatry and in psychology today, there is them and there is us. There is us who are sane and knowledgeable, and then there is them who are insane or neurotic or have problems, and we will fix them. So one of the big realizations was there's no us and them. It's a hype, but there's only us. There's absolutely only us. We are all in the same boat. And the problem is never in the person. It's always between us. What some people refer to as trauma always occurs between two people. I realized that a lot of people tell their history by saying this happened and that happened and so on. That's all mystification. It's all lies. Nothing ever happens. It's always somebody does something to somebody. And that's what I call praxis, process is try to cover it up and say this happened and that happened, which covers up who did what to whom. So that's one thing, that there is only us. We are all in the same boat. The problem is never in a person, it's always between us. The treatment is how we treat each other. It's not professional. I realized that already Aristotle thought there were three kinds of sciences. There were the theoretical sciences, like mathematics and physics. There were what he called the productive sciences, like medicine and architecture, where there is a blueprint. You know what you want, you do it, and then you can check whether you did it right or wrong. You produce things. And then there is what he called the practical sciences. And he gave two examples, ethics and politics, which you have to do by the seat of your pants. Because ethics is how we treat each other. Politics is how to accrue and maintain sufficient power so that I can do or you can do what you want and not what you don't want. That requires power. And Machiavelli wrote a book to the prince, how to acquire and maintain power. It's an art. But in every situation, because how to treat each other is situational. How I can have sufficient power that it's not power over. I don't want power over anyone. I don't teach people how to have power over anyone, but power to do what you want and power to not do what you don't want. That's also situational. So there is no theory, there is no generalization. There is always just a moment and a particular situation. And so there is no protocol, there is no theory, there is nothing except practice. That's why he called them the practical sciences. Now that was over 2,000 years ago. And humanity is very slow to learn. I mean, I don't know if you know that, but the first human being who said, the sun is not going around the earth. Actually, it's the earth that's going around the sun. It took over 1,000 years before that became common knowledge. And during that 1,000 years, many people were burnt at the stake and tortured and hurt who were speaking the truth. Those in power, the church, absolutely did not want to even entertain the possibility that we are not central. So I'm not surprised that it's taking 2,000 years. And we still don't want to know that psychotherapy has nothing to do with medicine. Psychiatry shouldn't be a medical enterprise. So, you know, it was over 50 years ago that a psychoanalyst, a psychiatrist by the name of Thomas Szasz said that mental illness was a bad metaphor. That he wrote a book, The Myth of Mental Illness, over 50 years ago. It's like he never wrote it. Nobody wants to know. People are still talking about mental illness. He made it absolutely clear and convincing. There is no such thing as mental illness. Either there are brain diseases, in which case one should go to a neurologist or a brain surgeon. A doctor is very handy when you have brain disease. or you're missing a part of your brain due to impact or accident or whatever, or there are problems in living. But problems in living is not mental illness. There is no such thing as mental illness. So there is no such thing as mental health. And, you know, you were speaking to deaf ears. No one wants to know. It's a very convenient mistake. Laing's last paper, just one more thing. Laing's last paper, before he died, he published a paper in a Buddhist journal at Naropa. It was entitled The Hatred of Health. That was the title. And he addressed the issue of why do we hate the truth? Why do we escape from the truth? Fritz Perls, who lived on the island here, he defined neurosis as not seeing the obvious. And so here I'm talking about obvious things that nobody wants to see. Trauma is a medical term. If I get hit over the head and my skull is crushed and I need stitches and repair, that's called a trauma. Trauma means wound. So it's already a metaphor. You know, when a parent betrays a child or a parent shames a child, there is no blood, there is no crushing of bones. That's not trauma. It's already medicalizing a tragedy. It's already medicalizing something that shouldn't have happened. I remember when I was maybe 7 years old, every summer my mother took me up in the mountains, in the Hungarian mountains. And I made friends with a boy who was maybe 10 years older than I was, and he was the shepherd. And I went out with him every day for a while to tend the sheep, and we were talking, and we were good friends, I thought. And one day we were sitting face to face on the ground, surrounded by sheep and mountain and sunshine. And he was smoking a cigarette, and he says to me, "Have you seen people blow smoke out of their ears?" And I said, "No." He said, "Would you like to?" I said, "Sure, show me. You can do it?" He said, "Yeah, I can do it." So he says, "Give me your hand." So I gave him my hand. He says, "Really concentrate on my ears. And just keep your eyes on my ear. I'm gonna blow smoke out of it." He took a deep inhalation, and as I was watching for the smoke coming out his ears, he put his cigarette out on my hand, right? Pain, hurt, actually, that was trauma, medical trauma. I got burned. But the real trauma was I jumped up, crying, and ran away. And the words that I would use, try to use accurate words for what happened, was I lost my innocence. Up until then, I was innocent. I would not, my map of the world and human relationships didn't include the possibility that someone who I consider a friend could possibly hurt me and get off on it. So I lost my innocence. So it was actually a disaster. That wasn't trauma, that was disaster. You know, the Germans incinerating Jews in Auschwitz was a disaster. That's not trauma. How to live after the disaster, that's the real issue. How to live once you lost your innocence, and what conclusions to draw from it. Like I could have drawn the conclusion of avoid Hungarian shepherds. I could have drawn the conclusion avoid all men. avoid all people. I mean, after a human being hurts another human being, what's the one who has been hurt to do? Because we have enormously efficient avoidance learning through evolution and phylogenetics, that you put your hand in fire once, you never want to put your hand in fire again. So there is avoidance learning that's sometimes one trial learning. So that was very painful for me, not the burn, but the loss of innocence, waking up to this is what human beings can do to each other was a disaster. And how to avoid it? I never wanted to have an experience like that again. Now, actually, there is a man called Jean Améry who wrote a book called Suicide. And after he wrote it, he killed himself after it went to the printer. And the whole book is about, don't you for a moment think that I'm insane or I have any problems. I just don't want to live in a world where I can't trust anyone and where there is no justice. Because what happened to him, he worked in the French underground during the Nazi occupation. And 3 Nazis attacked him, 2 held him down, the 3rd one approached him looking into his eyes and punched him in the stomach so that he bent over, couldn't breathe for a while. And then after the war, he survived. After the war, he saw 2 of the 3 in a French cafe having fun, laughing, and so on. So after that, he wrote the book. He says, there is no justice. Nobody called them to account for what they did to me. And after looking in the face of that person, I can't tell that behind the face, is there someone who can do that to me or not? So I can't trust anyone. There is no justice in the world. I don't want to play. And he killed himself. Exit. So, that's what actually the difficulty, how to live, how to love, how to work, what meaning are you going to make after you've been hurt? Now, betrayal trauma is the worst trauma. Like living on the side of a volcano and the volcano erupting and sweeping your house off the side of the mountain and you having to run for your life. That's not as bad an event. That's not a big enough disaster to have to go to therapy with. But if your father rapes you, and if your mother doesn't leave your father when you tell her, that's betrayal. So, in a way, I felt betrayed because I thought we were friends. So, how to live in the world without betraying anyone and avoiding betrayal again? Some people come up with avoid human connection, live alone, isolate yourself. But then it's like you're in a double bind because you're damned if you isolate yourself, and you think you're damned if you risk connection after you have been hurt, betrayed.
I wonder, I've been so curious to ask you, Andrew, because maybe that's connected to what you're saying. Like, that humans have been betrayed by humans.
Well...
And so AI is safer in some sense. And are you going to record?
The other day I was reading, and I totally agree, AI is a stochastic monkey or a stochastic parrot. A stochastic meaning it's a statistical term. When you watch a frog leap from lotus to lotus leaf to lotus leaf, it does it randomly. So AI is random, it's a random parrot. Again, talk about bad metaphors. AI has nothing to do with human intelligence. Nothing. It's basically using language to simulate some kind of speech or text, but it cannot do anything except copy and paste. So there is absolutely no intelligence there, as we know for human beings. So for somebody, but all of us humans have this talent to anthropomorphize. We think very easily that the trees are talking to me, anything that moves, anything that makes sounds, we can hear a message from. And so people project onto AI human characteristics. But actually, it's a tool. It's no more than a hammer. And it can be used, it can be used very, very well for all sorts of things that require copying and random searches. But to imagine that I can get any kind of human help with my grief from AI is absolutely insane. I'll tell you the other thing that I have come to, that really if anything makes a difference in therapy, it's not knowledge. It's not, like, for example, I came to realize for about 20, 30 years in my practice, I thought my job was to understand people. And then in the last 10, 15 years, I realized there is no hope for me to understand another human being. It's just impossible. We are so infinitely other. It's a miracle that we seem to imagine that we understand each other. But actually, when you come right down to it, it's impossible. And I'll say a couple more things about that. But I also thought, which was a discovery, that I can love somebody without understanding them. And that's what therapy is about. And AI cannot love. There is no love there. And there is no understanding, even if it was possible. Now, I'm saying an example where I realized that there is no understanding is the British were one of the first ones to venture into China. And they wrote back from China about the Chinese. But when you read the first reports of the Brits from China, they were really talking about themselves. They projected onto the Chinese their own categories. So for me to try to understand you, I cannot do anything, but I have my own ways of being in the world, and I try to stuff you into what I already have. But your categories may be unimaginably different from mine. So actually, if I try to understand you, I will be objectifying and colonizing you. Understanding is a way of making the other into self, like the Brits did with the Chinese. The first Brit who wrote something that may be true of the Chinese was a man who stayed there for 40 years, married a Chinese woman, and lived there. And near the end of his life, he said some things about the Chinese mind and the Chinese consciousness that was different from the British one. So, what makes a difference in therapy is the relationship between the patient and the therapist. Nothing else counts. The content might as well not be there. The conversation is important. Because during the conversation, there is an us. And I'm pointing up there because it's non-material. There is the patient and there is I, two human beings. And very soon, there is an us. E.E. Cummings, the poet, said, I am through you, so I. Realizing that who I take myself to be depends on what company I keep. Laing, my teacher, used to say, you're only as smart as the company you keep. If you want to be smart, you better keep smart company, because if you keep stupid company, you'll dumb down. I am through you, so I. So let's say I have 100 patients. They know 100 different Andrews, because I am different with each of them. The us that we have is different every single time. And it's constantly changing. And if the us is real, then something happens that cannot be predicted. One is not alone. Most people suffer because they are isolated. And when you feel alone, even in the company of another person, it hurts even more. So sometimes somebody who comes feels like he or she is not alone for the first time in my company. And that's what counts, nothing else. So then it's the us that moves both me and the patient. Or if there is a family and there is a real us, then the us, then surrendering to the us is not submitting to the other. So if the two of you have an us, and one of you is spiritually deaf, which means you're cut off from the us, then you think the one who is in connection with the us and says, don't you feel what we want? The other would feel like you're just trying to control me, right? But in a real relationship, there is no control. In the therapeutic relationship, there is no control. At best, both the patient and the therapist are going to be moved by whatever that us is, that miraculous us. In Sanskrit, the word for marriage is the same as for death. Because how they think is that you're two individuals, you decide to get married, you die as individuals, because if you don't, there is no marriage, and you're reborn as parts, smaller parts of something bigger than either of you, which is the us. And if a child comes, then the couple has to die and reborn as a threesome. Because if that doesn't happen, if one of the marriage partners says, I'm going to continue as I have always been, I'm not going to give in to anything, then there is no marriage. If the couple says, okay, we'll have a child, but we are not going to change as a result of it, the child has to adapt to us, then the child will feel unwelcome and shut out and is going to feel betrayed because the child is invited in, but not really. But to really allow someone in, you have to die as you have been and be reborn in unknown ways. So, really, the only thing that can be of use is this business of not being alone. Let's say the person who comes for therapy is someone who lost their way, who is perplexed, problems in living. In what I call therapy, which, by the way, the root of that word is attention, attendant. The therapist is an attendant. So I think my task is to go to where that person is, find that person in the woods where he or she is lost, and keep that person company. The fact that the person is not alone, that we are both lost, already allows that person to not be as anxious, as frightened as they would be if they thought they were alone. How they have to and where they have to go in order not to feel lost is entirely their business. It's not the therapist's business. The moment the therapist thinks that they know better anything about the patient's life than the patient knows, that's inviting transference. So maybe I'll say a couple of words about that. The transference is, Lacan defined transference as presuming that the other knows. Children presume their parents know. It's a sad day when the child realizes his or her parents know nothing. And it's very sad and very frightening. Freud said that the end of transference is when the patient realizes the patient knows what the therapist knows. So they both know. Lacan said Freud didn't dare to go all the way thinking about this. And Lacan said, the end of transference is when you realize that nobody knows. And when you realize that nobody knows anything for sure, then all you can hope for is that there are no parents and we are not children, and we put our heads together and do our best. We can keep each other company. There is nothing else. No knowledge. So anybody who says, I'm an expert, is making money on other people's misery.
So I want to talk a little bit about, there's a lot here. When I hear you say that, if I can, once I realize that, maybe I can also relax a little bit, right? This person, or it could be terrifying. Nobody knows, and now I'm terrified, and I don't know what to do. And so, in there, what do I want to say? That freedom could be terrifying, or I could take that freedom to be that I can now go on living as me. And it seems that something, something informs that. How I'm able to respond to that situation depends on how. I'm not asking this question super well.
No, I get what you mean.
There's a lot I want to say. I want to talk about the maybe I'll just riff for a second and then pass it over to you. There's, is it because when I arrive in therapy at that place that I've become comfortable enough to make that realization about transference? This person doesn't know. Like maybe then I'm at a point where I can relax, because in order to get there requires quite a bit of change for me. I have to let go of a lot of things I believed about or I feel.
The nature of reality.
The nature of reality, right? What does that take to arrive at that place and then be able to work with it, as opposed to just be terrified? Am I free at that?
Love part of it?
That's what we're getting. Is love part of that?
The company piece, yeah.
Yeah, is love required there, or am I still stuck in a kind of false freedom of a world of
Well, I don't know if I'm going to address exactly what you're talking about, because there are several things in what you say. The issue of freedom from where I'm looking at, you're condemned to freedom. We are all condemned to freedom. Like you cannot not be free. Like just being human, you're condemned to freedom. You can use your freedom to pretend that you're not free. But that doesn't change the fact that all of us are always free. Now that could be very scary for someone who hypnotized himself or was hypnotized to believe otherwise. But at least the therapist ought to know that that is the case. And of course, the moment you realize that with this total freedom comes responsibility, that yes, you're free, but of course everything you do has consequence, then you get scared. So scared that you could actually escape into an altered state of consciousness that people will easily label as madness, schizophrenia, or whatever. Where I'm not responsible. I don't know what's going on. I'm not free. I have compulsion. I have to do this. It's never true. Just because one can say it, it doesn't mean it's the truth. Also, it seemed to me when you were talking that you imagined yourself being very scared in the company of this nutcase who says, you know, I don't know anything, nobody knows anything, and it's all right. I mean, you know, like you might think this guy should go for therapy. But you don't calculate, you can't imagine the effect of another human being on the state of consciousness you are in. Like, I'll give you an example. Laing used to tell this story frequently, that there was a woman who came to see him for a session. And when she came into the room, the walls were talking to her, the chair and the couch were talking to her. She was hallucinating, heard voices. Anyone, any psychiatrist or psychologist would have diagnosed her schizophrenic. Laing was in a state of mind where he was radiating harmlessness. I'm not going to do anything to you. I mean, that's big, because most psychiatrists are eager to do something to you. Most psychologists are eager to do something to you. Laing was radiating, I'm not going to do anything to you. And he himself wasn't afraid of this woman. So he wasn't afraid. Now, I don't know if you know, but my experience from childhood on, that fear is contagious, but so is not being afraid. So after half an hour of this woman ranting and raving in Laing's office, she calmed down because he held his center. He was unafraid and wasn't moved to give her drugs or inject her or call the police or anything. So she calmed down. And then she was able to tell him what frightened her into that state, just because she calmed down. And she didn't even know, and Laing didn't know, although he suspected, that she was really frightened. And it's the fear that human beings can be so frightened that they forget what they are frightened about, or they can't even speak about what frightened them. But she relaxed enough to say, my father rapes me about 3 times a week, regularly. And I live at home, and I really don't know what to do. So Laing said, okay, here is an address. Go there, live there, don't go home. I'll get whatever stuff you need. I'll tell your parents that you're safe, but they will not know where you are. And don't go home until you have a black belt in karate or one of the martial arts. And that's exactly what happened. She didn't come back for therapy. She wasn't mentally ill. She worked very hard, took her 3 years to get a black belt, and that was the first time she went home. And when her father took a step towards her, she said to him, if you take one more step towards me, I'll break your arm. And she knew she could do it. And that was it. No more fear, no more hurt. And during the 3 years, maybe she saw Laing 3 times. Mostly she was busy learning to fight. So, in the right company, you may change your state of consciousness. You may realize. Sometimes it doesn't even happen during the time you're with your therapist. Like, happened to me, and Laing has another story where an older woman came to see him for the first time, initial session. And they basically had a good conversation. Nothing much happened. She went home. She came for her next week's appointment and said that night, when she was watching TV, she suddenly had an overwhelming experience, and she cried and remembered something which changed everything. What she remembered was when she was maybe 6, 7 years old, she was sitting on a bus or a train with her father, and she completed the drawing, and she showed it to her father, and her father looked at it and crumpled it up and said, "This is shit." And she remembered there, like something like 50 or 60 years later, that she closed her heart as a little girl. That's how she put it. She closed her heart to protect herself. And what she was crying about is that during the TV show, after having a conversation with Laing, her heart opened. And when her heart opened, that's when she realized, my God, for over 60 years, my heart was closed. But again, she didn't need to go and keep seeing Laing. She said, "Thank you very much. My heart is open. I'm going to live differently." So there was no intention on Laing's part in either case. He didn't know what was going to happen. There was no knowledge, just a hope that if 2 or more people give themselves over to the situation, something happens.
I love this, and I want to challenge a little bit. So Merleau-Ponty, that's a Sartre's idea, right? We're condemned to freedom, and Merleau-Ponty says that in his famous essay that we're always free. But he also says there's a kind of sediment that we're in. It's like our past is it still doesn't mean that we're going to change tomorrow. These moments with Laing, it almost seems like. And I'm not denying that this is true. I believe it too. They're almost these moments of, my heart is open. I've changed, and I recognize my freedom, and my life is different. But it certainly doesn't feel that way for a lot of people. Which is why I think therapy can be so compelling, right? Different types of therapy. I need to go. I need to constantly feel my body and find where the emotions are.
But even as I listen to you, the older I get, the more impatient I get, because that kind of meandering seems to me presumes that we live forever. Like if he lived forever, there is time to muck about. But, there is an urgency, and it's very tricky because one of the most hurtful things an adult can do to a child is to be impatient with the child. So things take as long as they take. However, like I have one patient who says, I'm working on it. It's a process. And I say, what process? Like, you just have to turn a switch, on, off. What the hell is the process? Like, on, off. Stop doing it. Like, the last workshop I did with Laing as co-leader was up on Cortes Island. There were about 40 people. It was on addictions. Now, Laing used to be, according to his own evaluation, a seasoned drinker. He's Scottish. In Glasgow, people were proud of how much they could drink. So he would classify himself as a seasoned drinker. I proposed to him that we do a workshop on addictions. He didn't say anything to me, but when he arrived, a year later, I took him to a restaurant and he ordered 2 carafes of coffee and 2 large Cokes, all at once. I said, what's going on? He says, I renounced alcohol when you called me. How could I do a workshop on addictions and keep drinking? So renunciation is a very accurate word. He said, stopping doing what you're doing is easy. To promise yourself that you will never do it again is hard. And that's what renunciation is. He renounced alcohol a year before. He poured himself his favorite whiskey, a glass. He savored it, and he told himself, all promises are to self, not to other. If I promise myself something, then later I can tell you that I promised myself, just so you know. So he promised himself that as long as he lives, till he dies, alcohol will never cross his lips again. He renounced alcohol. Right? It's a decision. Decide, the word decide, side is the same as suicide or homicide. So the word decide means to murder, kill all other possibilities. So if you decide something, you hold to it regardless how you feel, regardless of anything. So he decided. During the workshop, there were sex addicts, alcoholics, all heroin addicts, fat people who were addicted to food. The great R.D. Laing gently kept saying, there is no other way. When you're sick and tired of what you're doing, you're going to quit cold turkey. It's a decision. And there are very, very good stories of heroin addicts who finally came to that conclusion. That's the end of addiction. He said, everything else is just pretending that there is a process to it. So that's what I mean. It's all, you decide. Hold to your decision. Bob Newhart has a very good clip.
This will automatically stop after a little while. Can we maybe just rewind a couple of sentences and say what you said about the end there?
Sure.
Yeah, thank you. We can go, yeah.
Can go now?
Yeah.
So,
Laing at the conference.
yeah, at the conference, he had only one advice. Whenever the time comes that you actually want to stop, stop. There is nothing else. There is no process. Actually, therapy could start after you decide to stop doing whatever the hell you're doing, and you're not going to do it, and the therapist could be your company while you suffer all the impulses to keep doing it. But you won't, because you decided it's out of the question. You murdered the alternative of continuing. But all sorts of things will come up, because a lot of addictions are painkillers. So you stop your addiction, the pain will come forth, and actually the addiction is also isolating you. So you need company when you stop the addiction, because it's a painkiller to squelch the pain of feeling cut off and lonely. And when everything is out of control in your life, there is one thing you can control. Like somebody who drinks a lot, who is labeled alcoholic. Again, there are no alcoholics. That's an invention. There are people who prefer to drink than have human connection, because they have been betrayed, because it's painful to be in connection, and alcohol is a painkiller. So you stop the painkiller, then the pain comes forward. That's when you need a companion who will have empathy and sympathy with you, and you offer relationship instead of the addictive substance or whatever it is. So this business of I'm working on it, it's just a lie. Like all addicts say, I'm working on it. But that just prolongs the time one changes, if one wants to change. What one cannot control is one's impulses and one's emotions. No one can control one's impulses and emotions. But all of us can control our attention and our musculature. The organ of the will is the musculature. So I can always control what I do with my impulses. I can't control my impulses. So it's possible that an addict or habits that you picked up will want to manifest till you die. But once you decided you're not going to do that, you're not going to do that, because you control your muscles. So, an example. When my son was born, I was about 30. I was alone with him, and he was maybe 3 or 4 months old. And he was crying, and he wouldn't stop crying. I did everything I could, and he kept crying. And I had the impulse to squeeze his arms and shake him. I really had that impulse. But I caught myself, went into the other room, sat down and said, what is this? Like, that's certainly not going to help him. And then I remembered, I didn't remember until then, my mother used to squeeze me and shake me. And so my mother wanted to come through me to do to my son what she did to me. So when I had any impulse like that again, I just said, hi, Mom, go to hell. I'm not going to let you touch him. So she was there. The impulse was there. It was in my body. I don't have to. That's the human capacity. That there are animals who have no room between impulse and action. It's impulse action. Their life depends on it. But there's impulse, pause, action. And that pause is what gives us our freedom.
Do you have a question there?
That one.
Yeah, I'll just wonder more about the same thing in a different way. You talk about in Credo, and then it's a big part of the second half of the Laing's voice of experience. The I would call it the imprint of this very early biology, and even mythology being a projection of pre-birth experience. So I hear you, and I agree. We're free. I can do something with my impulses, and then on the other hand, I could be so influenced by potentially by something that happened when I was a blast or So how do I hold both of those? I know that you're not saying.
Well, to give in to all the impulses, to go with the habits that you develop in order to survive, because that's where they come from. To go with it is easy. To go against it is hard. And as I listen to you, you're basically saying, it's so hard. So you're free to take the easy way, but then in your freedom, you give in to your impulses. Fine. And then you may have to avoid him. You may have to run for your life. No, I'm not. I'm trying to tell the truth here. So the news that I have for you is that the past does not determine the future. It feels like it does. And you could use it as an excuse. You could do people in and say, I can't help it. It's my past. It happened in my mother's womb.
Just so we're clear, that's not what I think. Just want to have a conversation. Maybe there's a little part of me that's like.
By the way, you have no parts. You see, that's a miracle. People talk about part of me this, part of me that. Drives me insane.
Oh, we don't like that either, actually. The IFS thing. I don't like that.
Machines have parts. Yeah. You grew out of one cell. It's the biggest miracle if you bend your mind around it. The zygote, when you got turned on, there was no process. Suddenly, there was nothing, and there were you. As soon as your father's sperm unpacked its material and united with your mother's, there you were, dark light. So, like up to a certain point, Lacan even says we are spoken by our parents. Like children, even what children say could be that they are channeling their father or they are channeling their mother. The metaphor is you're in a spacecraft and it's on automatic. Houston, Texas is making decisions about the spacecraft that you're in. Now, it's a wonderful position. You're seeing the stars. You don't have to make any decisions. Everything is done from Houston, Texas, and you are in outer space. At a certain point, they say to you, okay, buddy, go to manual. We are over and out. Texas is gone, and you make your decisions. You're on manual. Some people feel happy that now finally they can do what they want. Others get terrified. They would be far more comfortable. Actually, I think our existential position is that around age 16, you start finding your own voice, and you're responsible for everything you do. Sartre even said that after a certain point, you're responsible for your face, because your face is a result of decisions you made in the past. Yeah, you're responsible for your face. So, there's a movie we made here in Vancouver with Laing just before he died. did you used to be R.D. Laing. And a couple of my patients volunteered to do therapy with him, which was filmed. And there was one of my patients, a woman, I think Janet was the name in the movie. She was talking about her father raping her periodically when she was a child. And she was trying to remember exactly what her father did and what her father didn't, whether he penetrated her mouth or vagina or anus or what. And Laing very quietly, very gently says on the film, look, actually, as far as your present and future are concerned, it doesn't matter exactly what he did and what he didn't do. Assume the worst. Assume he did everything. Assume the worst, and still your future and your present is not dependent on what he did to you then. And that's not generally accepted. But I think it's true. That the past is done. The Greeks used to say metanoia. Metanoia is a change of heart, change of mind. The Greeks didn't differentiate between mind and heart. It was one. So you've done wrong. People did terrible things with you. Turn, and all is forgiven. All is forgotten. It's the turning, and that's what the Greeks said, metanoia. And on the way from normal state of consciousness to metanoia is paranoia. And paranoia is the fear. As you leave ordinary state of consciousness, the old maps of how the world is don't work anymore. The new one where you're going is not quite working yet. And so there is a very confusing part as you are, like Jonathan Livingston Seagull, when he went from flying at this level, there was a place where he got scared. And let's go back to where I was. And psychiatry and psychology pulls people back into normal, as opposed to encourage people to go to the next level where there is a genuine change of heart and change of mind, where there is the possibility of what used to be, so that habit becomes illusion and freedom is reality. There have been a lot of psychologists and scientists who say freedom is an illusion and habit is reality. So, it's black and white, and people can absolutely disagree. But I was taking off on you saying you have parts.
Oh, which I don't. I recognize that I use it, but I don't. But let's talk about it because parts.
It's a big thing now. IFS, parts work. That's a big thing in the therapy.
I know, it's insane.
Yeah.
As far as I'm concerned.
It's not helpful. I was part of that world. I used it as a practitioner, and I also utilized it for myself, and it actually fragmented my psyche more. Yeah. And it wasn't until I started working with Bruce, where he was just with me as a real human, that I started to come. I was calm. Like the parts work thing is, and it's so in though.
I know, it's very attractive.
So in, yeah.
So, I was just talking about the miracle of from that one cell, you became as you are, which is fantastic. Like, no one can do it. No one can imagine how to do it. Imagine your head was about this small, and your head is that big now. And can you imagine a small house being transformed into a big house without the interruption of service? Like the electricity never had to be rewired. Like you always saw, you always heard, you always tasted. like fantastic, of how you could grow into such a differentiated big person from one cell. And every cell in your body still has that signature. So, you know, like, I want to honor the fact that I have no parts. Even to say liver, my liver or my kidney, there are no livers and kidneys in the universe. The language says, that's my liver, that's my kidney. It's all me. Language parses up the world, and if you know several languages, you realize that they see the world differently because they have different, the attention goes to different things. So people speaking different languages pay attention to different aspects of life.
That makes me feel curious about, I know a lot of your work was published in Hungarian. There's books, is it the book on relationships that just recently published, and another book like The Lost Wandering Guide or something with, yeah. So these, you have so much of your heart and your your heart and your way of being in this world in that language. Is there anything from all of your work in Hungarian that you feel like you haven't articulated through English yet to the world?
No,
and yeah,
no, it's more subtle than that. I left Hungary when I was 16, 1956. And so really I had the vocabulary of a 16-year-old. And then I didn't go back until really around 2000. And I spent a semester at a Hungarian university giving a couple of courses. And I had to relearn Hungarian. Now, why I think it was a good thing that I reconnected with my roots is that actually it improved my ability to express myself in English, that I reconnected to my roots. So how I think, I don't think it's an amalgam of, I remember that when I arrived in Toronto in 57, I couldn't speak any English. And my first dream in which I heard English or I spoke English in my dream was 3 years later. So it took 3 years of immersion in English before it became a part of me. And whether I have a few patients who speak both Hungarian and English. And it's very interesting because we drift, sometimes speaking Hungarian, sometimes English. And maybe the more emotional things we speak about in Hungarian and the more intellectual things we speak in English. But I wouldn't be sure, it becomes a mixture. But I remember realizing that in Hungarian there is no word for care. You know, that always struck me. Like, that must make a difference in consciousness if there is not even a word for care.
wow.
Yeah.
Just take a beat on the camera.
I can't generalize it. I don't feel that, but in some ways, they go around it. I mean, you can talk about caring, but just that there is not that one word. I couldn't find it. Actually, the funny thing was that there was an organization around 56 for Hungarian refugees by the English and the Americans that was called CARE, C-A-R-E. It was an acronym. And that's when I first looked up, what does it mean? Does it mean anything? And couldn't find a Hungarian equivalent.
But love. They have the word love.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
What do you write about in the book of relationships?
Well, a little bit what I already indicated, like, for example, if a man approaches a woman and wants sex, the woman has every right to say, like, say he approaches with an erection and says to the woman, do something about this. The woman says, where did you get it? Like, it has nothing to do with me. It didn't arise between us. Like, really, a lot of what passes for sex is mutual masturbation. And there is nothing wrong with mutual masturbation, but it's not sex, how I understand it. So, and it can be a sport, it can be a gift, but what I call sex is, maybe the metaphor would be that the woman is a wing that can never fly. One wing doesn't fly. The man is a wing, and one wing cannot fly. And to use a common word, you hook up, and if you're lucky and you know what to do, then suddenly you start flying. And that's the us. That's the us. That's what is sex. It's not one doing the other. It's not one controlling the other or the other controlling the one. It's both surrendering to something larger than either. So the us gets sexy, and that brings the two people together. And there is no who wants it and who is active, who is passive, who is doing what to whom. And the experience may be one experience. Even the penis could belong to both. Like, it's one lovemaking. It's not one making love to the other or the other making love to the one. It's one something that the two people surrender to. And because, like, the two wings have to surrender to the bird. The bird is the us. And if the bird wants to fly, but if one wing says, let's rub together, like, there's no life there. But if the bird says, we want to fly, okay. So, but that happens in a lot of other things, not just in sex, but in conversation, in dancing. There is a very, very good movie. I think it's called The Tango Lesson. A woman wrote it, a woman plays the role, a woman directed it, same woman. She's wonderful, forget her name. She decides that she wants to learn the tango, so she goes to Argentina, finds a man who is a master, and of course the man is macho, and he says, when you dance with me, I don't want to know you exist. I lead, you follow, and that's the tango. She says, okay. And she learns to follow him flawlessly. And they dance beautifully, it looks good. And after she masters what he wanted to teach her, she says, okay, now could we find our dance? Because that's your dance that I participate in, that I give myself over to. Could we find our dance and see what it's like? And of course, he immediately misunderstands her because he can't imagine anything else that she wants to lead and she wants him to follow. And of course, being macho, he says, never. Like, that's not on the menu. She said, no, 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 no. I want to know what happens if no one leads and no one follows. He doesn't understand. But they do it. And by the end of the movie, you see the dance. And it's beautiful. Where they surrender to the dance. They surrender to the music, both of them. Not to each other, but to the music. And then I actually thought of, string quartets that sometimes they perform together, the good ones, 30, 40 years. Can you imagine 4 people coordinating their lives? What are they doing? What's the experience that is so good that they would sacrifice so much for that? Well, I think what happens is that when 4 people are rehearsing or practicing, they fight. They say, you're too loud, you're too soft, you're going too fast, you're going too slow. They're fighting, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And then there are occasional moments when 4 people play like one, where the music plays them. And they become one with the music, one with the composer. And if it's a public performance, they become one with the audience. And that's why audiences go. Because sometimes, and it cannot be willed, there are audiences where it doesn't there are concerts where it doesn't happen. And there are private rehearsals where it does happen. But the more they play, the more chance there is that it happens, that they become one. And, that's what, when I do couples therapy, that's what I encourage people to do, is to practice a lot. Keep practicing until you have that feeling of, wow, we are small parts of something larger than ourselves. And, those are magic moments. There are people who say, that's the experience that makes life worthwhile. So I write about that.
It's beautiful. Yeah, I saw on a Facebook post that you posted recently something about men needing to learn to be men with men and not to try and perceive learning what it means to be a man through a woman or like mothering, and that's just from a relational dynamic, something I see a lot as a therapist and that I've experienced in my own life is that happens a lot, which must be part of this power dynamic of leading and following. But like a woman knows more how a man should be a man than a man knows for himself. And that's a common ill. It's sick. It's like a sick way of relating to one another rather than what you just described, which is surrendering to God or spirit.
Yeah, I'm not religious. I talk a lot about the spiritual, but I'm not religious. It's to me, it's instead of God, you can just say life. Like life lives me. Like I don't know how to live. I don't think you know how to live. You're being lived. I don't know how to beat my heart. I don't know how to liver my liver. I don't know. I didn't put myself together in my mother's womb. So it's like the apple tree apples, the universe peoples. So I'm a fruit of the universe. So are you. So in that sense, and that's what happens in psychedelic therapy, that here we look like we are separate. But you take some acid and you're here, where you're one. And you realize that one life lives all of us. And it's not either or. And the Buddhists know that, because if this is illusion and this is reality, actually both are reality. It's just you can learn where you pay attention to. I can pick, like to drive a car, I better be here. But making love, I better be here. I mean, you can make love here too, but it has a different flavor. So I just think that, and it doesn't make sense that a different life lives me than you. So I think there is only one life that lives everything that we say is living. And so that would be cause enough to treat each other well. Because, why, if we are one, why would I treat myself badly?
Why do you think we treat each other so poorly as humans? Why?
Well, the chakra system comes to mind. There are some people who think of, they found energy centers in the human body, about 7 of them, like right between your genitals and Uranus is the first chakra, the survival chakra. And they imagine the symbol of life in many cultures is the snake. So the Kundalini, the snake, is coiled, biting its own tail when you're in survival mode, where you really have to fight to live. But if you have a modicum of safety, then the snake starts going up your spine. And the second chakra is the sexual. The third chakra is power. The next one is the heart. And there are 3 more. As you go up here, the Egyptians have a snake coming out of their forehead. So they knew something about that energy. This is where you realize that you're one with all humans. And when it comes out here, you realize you're one with everything. So I think that so many of us are in survival mode that most people don't even come to the heart. Most people stop at the power chakra. And then sexuality, it will be paired with power, not with heart. So what I've been talking about in this system could be thought of as sex and heart is a different experience than sex and power. But if most people don't get to the heart because it's too dangerous, because we are pulled down to survival, then really we deal with each other from power. And if we deal with each other from power and there is no love, like love is a miracle. Like I sometimes walk around and say, why, given how much realer power is than love, and how much rarer love is than power, then it's a miracle that we don't have to jump over dead bodies and people are not knifing each other in Stanley Park, one of the public places here. So in a way, I can see it that could be worse.
Well, there's 2 more things, let's see, that we didn't.
So we talked about psychedelic therapy very much.
We haven't talked much about psychedelic therapy and then death, but we were talking about that before we did the recording, but like death, and then there's also like cancel culture, like microaggressions, like the intense liberalism. I'm kind of curious to hear you talk about that if you wanted to. And those are 3 of the things that we haven't really touched on yet that are in here. But also curious if there's anything you would want to share, Andrew, that you haven't, like that hasn't been. I've listened to almost all of your stuff that's available on the internet. I'm sure probably you have too. So if there's just even anything that interests you that isn't out there yet, talk about that too. So we have like 45 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah, and we don't need a ton of time to take photos. So.
Yeah, so maybe even longer.
Well, my last book that's going to come out now, it will be launched when I get to Hungary in a couple of days, is about the sandbox of diagnoses. It's about how there is a psychologist in Germany, and it's conversations with her that were put in a book form. And she works in a traditional hospital or clinic setting, and she has to deal with diagnoses such as OCD or anorexia or bipolar, this and that, so on. And we go into these diagnoses and try to open them up as to what is the phenomenology, what is the obvious, because people seem to have a need. People get relieved. Oh, it's known what I suffer from. But it's not true. It's a lie. You don't suffer from anything. That's what you do. And the question is, why would you do it? My approach is always, I want to get to know the person so well that I would be able to imagine what would I have to believe about the world in order for me to do the same things that that person is doing. So, say somebody who's been diagnosed with anorexia, my basic stance is there is no such thing. So why are we sticking that label? What are we sticking that label on? And what does it protect people from having to really deal with the social network rather than I suffer from? Same about OCD. Like, I suffer from that, as if it was a brain disease. Instead of, what did people do to me that I feel I have to do that? So in the book, we go through that kind of thing. For example, to give you an example about anorexia, I worked with a young woman who basically, English is refused to eat. It's not a disease. Like in different social circumstances, the parents would say she's bad. In little richer circumstances, they would say she's sick. And even richer circumstances, they would say she's crazy. So bad, sick, or crazy sometimes depends on the socioeconomic status of the people you're talking to. So, okay, this girl refuses to eat, and she gets very thin, and everybody gets worried. So, cut long story short, I would never just work with the girl. When anything like this comes my way, I say, I'll meet with the family. So I sit down with the mother, father, and the girl. Very soon, it's absolutely clear that the father is very gentle, very soft, and the mother is very controlling, and the father lets the mother control. So I sense that the daughter wants to teach the father how to say no to the mother. And what better way to say no to your mother than refuse to eat? A mother wants to feed her child. She refusing to eat, then no to the mother. And no one can, like the child is very smart and figures out that nobody can force her to eat. So she goes to the limit. They take her to the anorexia clinic at the hospital. And, but basically, They are just saying, if you go below a certain weight, you may kill yourself. But even killing yourself is saying no to your mother. So I go to work on the father. I don't want to have anything to do with the daughter. I go to work on the father. I encourage him to stand up to his wife and loudly and clearly and honestly, certainly when the daughter is around. Like, do it publicly, not privately. Well, within a very short time, he was courageous enough to try. And he succeeded, and the daughter felt she doesn't have to do it anymore. And suddenly she was cured. So that's an example. There is no such thing. Another, like impotence. There was a surgeon at the hospital here who performed all sorts of surgeries on men's penises to cure their impotence. Like, he could put a plastic rod in, or he could put a pump into their balls that they could pump up their penis on demand. Or, of course, injections that you give yourself before sex and you have a hard-on. And I remember, I went to have a talk with him and said, don't you converse with these people? Oh, I'm a surgeon. You know, they want an erection, I'll give them an erection. And their wife demands it, and, you know. And I remember my father, almost on his deathbed, kind of say, come here. And he whispered in my ear, my wife thinks I'm impotent, but only with her. So that gave me a clue as to what that's about. But, you know, like, why undergo surgery when maybe the advice is find a more attractive person or correct the relationship between the two of you? Sex is a very, you know, like an Arabian racehorse, a very, very temperamental. It's not weight carrying, like you can't put the weight of the relationship on the back of sex. And so sex disappears when other issues are not dealt with. You know, but surgery cuts right through everything. So, you know, manic depressive. Just slightly different, you pay attention. And there are people who, when they have hope of achieving what they want, and it's very important for them, then they become manic. It's like they're excited, everything is going their way. Then when they meet the first obstacles, they get so disappointed that they plummet into depression, which depression is already a medicalized word for despair. Despair means hopelessness. Spiro is hope, and despair is without hope. So hopelessness is an existential condition. Like you don't need it. Like, that's a human possibility, despair. But if you make depression, then there's antidepressants. There is no anti-despair. And actually, antidepressants were discovered before depression became rampant. And it was a terrific marketing success for the drug industry, that they found a drug which they said will solve an existential condition, which is everywhere. And so once there were antidepressants, and doctors started to speak about depression. So the condition came after the drug. Insane. OCD. People think somebody who is, say, washing his hands 100 times a day is out of control. It's not true. Just try to interfere with them washing their hands. They are in total control. So kids become obsessive or compulsive when they are so terribly controlled that they are out of control. They have no control at all. And again, smart kids hit on, here is a little thing I can control. And nobody can stop me. So they have total power over that small area. So again, if I were called in, I wouldn't do any of what you do with somebody who has this, but I would encourage the person to increase their power in the world. And the more control they will have in the world, the less they will be motivated to have the oddball control. And even beyond that, one of my best friends, Francis Huxley, who was the nephew of Aldous and was an anthropologist in that family of biologists and philosophers, he noticed that about himself, that often what he played with is that there is a thread tied around his ankle, and wherever he went, so if he sat in his chair, by going around the chair and sit in it, then he couldn't get out of the chair and go that way because the string would get tangled up. So if he came in like this, he would have to go out like that. That was one of his things. And he was kind of curious about it, but he considered more like he's playful. I mean, who cares? One day, he was in his father's study, and his father got out of the chair and got back in, and he thought his father did exactly the same thing, which he never noticed before. So he said, "Father, are you doing that?" And his father was shocked that nobody ever asked him, and admitted that, yes, I've been doing that for decades. And so Francis realized that he learned it from his father, even though nobody explicitly noticed it. You know, it's not like they had a gene or a chromosome. It's not inherited. It was learned subconsciously. So who knows? But, you know, I'm just giving you some examples that the labels, there is a book, How to Become a Schizophrenic. And it's a brilliant book because it shows you how easy it is to get labeled schizophrenic with minimum of lying. You just have to do certain things. Like, for example, if on a public street, you would start writhing on the pavement, and people thought you were writhing by having an orgasm, they would take you to hospital and to psych ward. But if you were writhing in pain, then they would take you to emergency hospital. Like, you know, even that's very funny. That same behavior, but if people feel sorry for you, then they call a doctor. If they envy you, they call a psychiatrist. So I like the sociology of all this, you know, in a way also, I think to go crazy officially, to have a psychiatric diagnosis, is a career choice. Because you get paid and you shirk all your responsibilities. So there have been two French philosophers who wrote a book this thick, where they link schizophrenia to capitalism. That one of the only ways that a human being can make sure that nobody exploits them is to become a psychiatric patient. Schizophrenics are not employable. So they make the case that it's a rebellion against capitalism, that it's the side effect of capitalism because there are no respectable ways to say, I don't want to be exploited. I don't want to do alienated work. I don't want to be a prostitute. Well, then you're crazy. So fascinating, I find.
Yeah, this way of looking at it immerses us into this so much possibility of when we just say, okay, if I'm responsible, if I'm free, then I have to really look at my life and look at my relationships and find out where am I giving away my power? Where am I?
But that's why my approach is always, under what circumstances would I behave exactly like my patient? And that gives me sometimes an insight as to where they are coming from, what world, what's their belief system. Because I think everyone is doing the best they know how, given what they believe. So nobody is crazy enough to be crazy without reason. So that's why Laing was the first one who made me think about that anybody whom we label crazy comes from an untenable environment. Like what seems crazy is trying to adapt to an impossible environment. So all the symptoms that people describe as psychiatric symptoms, like the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, 5th edition, I think by now, it's a compendium of if you eat too much, if you eat too little, if you are mourning after someone's death too long, if you don't mourn enough. You can look up the diagnosis by observing. Laing used to call it the witch's hammer, the Malleus Maleficarum, because that's how they hunted witches. There was a big book, and you were accused, then we'll look up whether you are or not. And so that's the state of psychiatry. It's still like basically a witch hunt. Instead of really examining that whatever looks crazy used to be an only way to survive where you come from. But you can see why the resistance against that. Because Laing actually talked about schizophrenogenic mothers. Well, who wants to talk about schizophrenia? It's like attacking motherhood. That there are mothers who contribute to the madness of their children. It's a taboo topic, like, no. So that's why I think the blame is put on illness and it's within the patient rather than it's in society, it's in the family, it's in the environment. Now, in the last book that will come out just when I go there now, it's green, the cover is green, and there is a fish in the grass. And that comes from, I often say that my approach is, if I find a fish in tall grass, I'm not going to give it psychotherapy. I'm not going to take it to the psychiatrist. I'm not going to give it drugs. I'll pick it up and run to the nearest body of water and drop him in. And it's going to be a happy fish. Otherwise, a fish in tall grass is a very unhappy fish. So that's really, I think, so obvious, but taboo saying and taboo thinking. That if someone is very unhappy, it's the environment we have to work on, not on the person. And we are each other's environment. So sometimes, I mean, even in medicine, I remember giving a talk on psychosomatic medicine, and there was a doctor of internal medicine in the audience, and in the question and answer, he said, "Are you interested? I'll tell you how I cure ulcerative colitis with one phone call." I said, "Sure, I'm very interested." And he said, "Leave your spouse. And if the person does, ulcerative colitis is gone." And, the psychosomatic background to it is that, in a way, like having constant diarrhea is saying no to nutrients and to all sorts of things prematurely. Like you don't keep it in until you take all the goodness out of it. It just flows out. No. So he says, it's someone who doesn't dare to say no to the person he or she lives with, and the body takes over. Say no by leaving them, and the body doesn't have to do that. So even there, like he's a doctor, and he says, change your environment rather than, cut out a large chunk of your intestines and, undergo surgery. Like, sometimes we rather have ourselves cut up than let go of the people who hurt us.
I think it's just such a shocking discovery. I was sitting in that it's how unwilling we are to, as a whole, and then as individuals, to face what's true, to be responsible, to say hard things. Yeah, I was sitting when you said that. I remembered I was sitting in a Shabbat, two people my age, maybe one a little younger, one a little older, who'd had pieces of their intestines removed. One of them who I know somewhat well, and I believe that's true. They were compromising themselves in that way. It's sad to behold that.
Yeah. I thought about that, and I saw a lot of little movies. You can find it on the internet. Primates. It's like the program for primates is the baby separates from the mother, goes into the bush to explore, and if the little one gets scared, the program is run to mother, and runs to mother, grabs onto the mother embraces the little one, and the mother acts like an emotional kidney, it looks like to me. The baby pours all the fear into the mother's body, the mother fills up the baby with love and care, and then the baby goes out to explore again. Gets scared, run to mother, same thing. But imagine what happens when the mother scares the baby. The program is, hold on to mother. So that's where a lot of hanging on to what hurts us comes from. If your mother scared you when you were a baby, there's a short circuit in your understanding of the world. Because the metaphor would be, most people, when they pick up a red-hot piece of iron, they drop it. It hurts, you drop it. But those whose mother scared them, they pick up something that's hot, and the more it burns, the more you hold on. And you smell your own flesh burning, and you won't let go. Because the dependency that we have on mother is so great that you hold on to her even if she is abusing you and scaring you, rather than let go. And then that transfers into later situations where you hold on, where separation seems impossible, and you rather smell your own flesh burning.
You quote Laing and Credo saying that he eventually had to realize that his actions began to his actions and the way he was feeling, something about that aligned at a certain point when he declared, when I do things I don't want to do, I make myself sick. I'm going to stop doing that. And I noticed it even in the cafe. We were sitting in the cafe, and I really just like perfect lattes. I don't, it's ridiculous on one hand. On the other, and I realized how, even in that moment, how much I don't like this. And what do I do? And what I would have liked to done, just channeling maybe Laing, the spirit of Laing, would have been to sweep the latte off the table onto the floor, splash it everywhere, and say, "This is disgusting." And I think I would have felt alive and good and unencumbered by not trying to disappoint my mother anymore. But so where do we go with that? Like it seems like maybe I thought that person would have then had a great story. They might have had to clean it up. It would have been a bummer. Maybe I would have cleaned it up. They would have had a great story. How do we find
there's no answer. I mean, he at a bar where he was drinking, and there was a man he was conversing with. He didn't like how the man was treating him. He threw his drink on the man and says, "Go change." And the man went, it was a hotel bar, the man went and changed his shirt, came back, and Laing yelled at him, "I didn't mean change your shirt, I meant you change." Threw another drink on him. Now, it's not my temperament. That's not the level I want to imitate him. But still, there is something in that spirit that on Cortez, when we were doing a workshop, it was summer, and we were sitting on the side of on the seashore, and some of the 40 people who were in the workshop went in for a swim. Water was warm, everything was nice, but Laing and I were conversing. So one guy comes out of the water, all wet, starts conversing with us, which was fine. But at a certain point, this man said to Laing, "You should go in for a swim. The water is perfect." And Laing just looked at him and said, "If by the time I count to 3, you're not gone, I'll bash your head in. Now fuck off." Right? The man came to see me for 3 months in therapy as to what happened. Why did he do that? And it was very hard for the man to realize that Laing wouldn't tolerate being approached from the wrong angle. Like, you don't say to another adult, "You should." So his tolerance for "you should" was 0. Like, fuck off. Don't tell me what I should do. Not for a moment. No? Like, one more example. Sure. So, one more example, that BBC was going to come out to Laing's house to do a big interview, which the Philadelphia Association, which Laing was the president of, could have used for fundraising and all sorts of things. It was an important moment. So there were cameramen setting up and the crew, and the members of the Philadelphia Association were arriving. One of them was Francis Huxley. So Laing took Francis and introduced him all around. And he introduced him to one of the cameramen. And the cameraman said, "I don't care who he is, I'm just setting up." And Laing said, "What? You don't care who this man, get the fuck out of my house." And he threw the whole crew out, and there was never the recording. That was it. Like, he lived his, like, why should I endure anything? He basically decided at a certain point, he will endure nothing. Like, why should he? Now, it has cost. Like, there are consequences. Like, if you did that, there are other ways of not enduring a bad latte than that. Like, you just leave it there, or you take it back, or whatever. But you don't have to endure anything.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite principles I've learned through Bruce Singh when he quotes you. the endure nothing and nobody, or endure nobody and nothing. Yeah. It's so piercing.
Life is so short. And I don't know if he explicated it, but when a woman is being raped, she endures. Like she's captured and tortured, right? And on the woman's mind, there is only one thing. I can hardly wait till it's over, and I hope I'm still alive when it's over, right? Like that's endurance. So even to listen to somebody that you don't want to listen to, they are raping you in the ear. So why would you? Why would you allow yourself to be captured and tortured?
I think about that a lot with social media and like Instagram or Facebook or the news, and how inundating even that is of our attention. And I feel that way sometimes. Like this is
but at least you can turn it off.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like to actually turn it off.
But if someone holds you captive, you have to have the skills to say, I'm out of here.
Yeah.
I mean, I've thrown patients out, like just because someone pays. Like that was one of the first things Laing said to me in supervision when I arrived in England. One of the first hours, just because people pay you doesn't mean you have to listen to what they say. Like if I find it offensive or if I find it boring, I have to say. I actually accused patients of, are you trying to kill me? Boredom kills. I accused them of antisocial activity. Like, why are you boring me? Like, did I do anything to hurt you? That kind of spices up the conversation.
Well, it's such
You're so direct.
in therapy school, they'll even, something like Hakomi, they teach you to sort of absorb it in a loving way, right? Or
bananas.
Or you have to worry about being grieved, right? With the microaggression.
Worry about being grieved, yeah.
So we are. It does seem that we pad and protect. So I'd love to hear a little more about that.
Yeah, well, that's the difference, by the way, between a prostitute and a therapist, because there are a lot of similarities, right? Like prostitute is stand in for, and the therapist really stands in for a friend or someone like a parent, how a parent should be. But the transference is handled differently. And that's what a lot of therapists don't understand. A prostitute, like Leaving Las Vegas is also a great movie, where the male character decides to cash in everything and drink himself to death. He goes to Las Vegas to die of alcohol poisoning. But he meets Elizabeth Shue, who plays a prostitute. And she says, I'm the best prostitute in Las Vegas. Why? Because as soon as a man comes into my room, I know exactly what he wants and I give it to him. So that's the definition of a good prostitute. A therapist gets very quickly, intuitively, what the patient wants and frustrates the hell out of the patient. That's the difference. So the transference is handled opposite, which means that the therapist is not supposed to give the patient what the patient wants. The therapist is supposed to hold on to his center, feel the pressure the patient puts on, and speak about it. It's like, what happens is, as a therapist, I say, there is love there. Love is possible. Like, you can change. You can do all sorts of things. And the patient just focuses on the finger, and what an interesting finger, let me suck it. Now that would be a prostitute if the therapist starts giving the patient what the patient wants. But if the therapist says, find it outside, like, not incest in the family, but find a lover out in the world, then that's therapy. That I can tell whatever you're doing to me, you're probably doing to everyone. If I don't like what you're doing to me, probably no one likes what you're doing to them. I have the mandate, you pay me so that I'll tell you what you're doing to me. Other people will be too shy or won't even find the words, won't even know exactly why they want to escape from you. So you can see that a therapist is not there to endure the patient. Therapist is there to reflect to the patient what the patient is doing to the therapist. So that's why if a patient bores me, I accuse them. And, because what is boredom? Like in a marriage, if you start boring each other, why stay together? And what's the opposite? You keep surprising each other. So an infinite conversation is a conversation where there's constant surprise. So in a good marriage, there is never, you can never tell what the other is going to do or the other is going to say, because both partners are committed to be candid and spontaneous. And if you're candid and spontaneous, you don't have to, how am I going to surprise him? Or how am I going to surprise her? And it's not a project. You just don't edit what you say. You free associate. You say everything that comes to your mind to each other. Then you're bound to forever surprise each other. And so a relationship becomes boring when someone is editing what they want to say. And so a patient comes and edits what they want to say to me. That's why I'm bored. I'm not bored because I'm not interested. I'm bored because the other person pretends to talk to me, but they are not talking to me. Pretends to reveal things, but they are hiding. So, it kind of, after a while, it all makes sense.
I'm just reflecting on how different that psychotherapeutic approach is also from just normal psychedelic assisted therapy, which is not relational at all. And that's something I've really appreciated about your perspective too, is that the psychedelic therapy process has to be a living relationship.
Yeah, otherwise it actually, I think it's dangerous. Because when you go down, when the psychedelic takes you down here, and your therapist is staying up here, then you could go crazy. The pain of separateness, the pain of realizing that this person who is important to you is really not connected to you, would be shocking. So in almost every psychedelic session that I have engaged in, and of course, like when I was really doing that, I took about half as much as the patient. Nowadays, the therapist is not supposed to take any of the psychedelic, which then could make the patient feel like a specimen to be observed rather than be with. Like a togetherness. Like, how can be a togetherness if I'm kind of sitting there and, you are in a totally altered state of consciousness? So might as well, if we are going to do this, share the state of consciousness, be together in it. A philosopher, a friend of mine, told me that he hated therapists and he hated therapy. But there was, and when he was a teenager, he was terrified to go out of his house or out of his room. And he would have been labeled agoraphobic. And he thought it would be totally humiliating to go to somebody who wasn't his intellectual equal and say, help me, I suffer from agoraphobia. He knew that was false. So at a certain point, he decided that he's going to solve it. And what he did was he became what would be labeled counterphobic. How he handled it is he started to travel in the world. And from that age, all his life, he just died recently. His name is Alfonso Lingus. He wrote all his books from his lived experience. He was a phenomenologist, so he only talked about his experience. So he felt responsible to have interesting experiences. So he started to travel 6 months of the year. 6 months he taught in university, and 6 months he traveled. And he traveled to the most dangerous places on earth. He traveled where there were revolutions, he traveled where there were wars, he traveled where there were natural disasters. So he, on purpose, went to places where other people would be afraid of. So the interesting thing was, which I also experienced, that when he put himself in dangerous situations, he felt normal because he was afraid. Like in his room, feeling afraid didn't make sense. That was crazy. But he helped himself by changing the environment, and then he felt perfectly sane. So all his life, he decided that his greatest excitement was where his greatest fear was. So using fear as a compass, not to avoid, but to approach. So he, like Evel Knievel, you know, like I don't know if you have heard of the guy, but he was very fearful as a child. And he decided to do dangerous things. So he got a motorcycle and he started jumping over cars. And he could jump over 2 cars, 3 cars, 4 cars, 10 cars. He lived a ripe old age, but every bone of his body was broken. He didn't care. You know, he healed. And he did it again. And he loved flying over cars, hoping that he won't kill himself. You know? So that's it. So this guy, Lingus, in one of his books, describes a psychiatrist who is sick and tired of doing the traditional thing. And with one of his patients, he says, let's climb Machu Picchu together, just you and I. And they prepare for it, they pack, they go, they have an adventure. They can't go to the top, inclement weather. You know, they have a hard time, they almost die. They have to be there for each other. It's an experience. The two of them totally involved in mountain climbing. And they come back. And my philosopher friend said, well, he can understand that having an adventure with somebody could be life-altering. And, you know, there's no principle, there is nothing. It's just togetherness. So the book I wrote on psychedelic therapy, I call Radical Adventure, because that's what it is. You know, let's take acid together. Well, that's an adventure. Like there is no way of knowing what's going to happen while we are mountain climbing. No? So it has to be done by the seat of one's pants. And people now have protocols as to what the therapist is supposed to do. Like, that's insane. Like, you never know what's going to happen. How could there be a protocol? You know, and there are people who are experts at programming the music you are supposed to hear while you are, you know, when the patient may actually want silence. Or even, they said to me at an international conference, when I said, well, if my patient wants to play their music, I'm game. And they said, our patients are not educated enough to choose their own music. We we know what kind of music will give a good psychedelic experience. Like that's really asking for transference. They are the experts. And then they feel they earn the money that you have to pay them. People think like, why do I get paid? I don't know anything. I say to people, the only proper function of the will is to will not to will. So people say, with what intention should I go in to this experience? I say, for God's sake, it's cheeky. Who are you to have an intention? Like, if I'm a small part of something large, then it's cheeky to say, I want this. And Christians know this. I'm not a Christian, but they say one of the favorite prayers of Christians is, let thy will be done, not mine, which is precisely that. Like, prayer is always to something, the something larger that I'm a small part of. Like, do with me as you like. Like another Christian saying is, I'm in the everlasting hand of God, so God will do with me as he wants anyways, so why, it doesn't make any sense to have an intention. Surrender is the only proper attitude to go into a psychedelic trip with. Like, do with me as you like. I don't even know. Like, if I knew what would be good for me, then I would probably do it. So do with me what you, in your wisdom, think is going to be some help to me. So, like, have intention. Like most people, that's how it starts. What's your intention? Even in regular psychotherapy without psychedelics, yeah, let's set some goals. Insane.
Yeah, we went through one of those trainings for psychedelic guys.
It wasn't good. Yeah.
We have about this much time left, 50 minutes. I wonder, want to talk about anything? Talk about regression, or we could just kind of pause down, take some photos, and not have to rush. You can do that. I don't have to rush photos.
Yeah.
So.
You want to talk about regression first? Is that what you're saying, or just?
Yeah, I'm saying we could. Do you want to? I would like to ask about that. I think if we're gonna speak a little bit more, and then do you have anything else, and then we can set how much time we want.
Yeah. For us both, because I'm a psychotherapist and Jeremy's on his way to be one, like, it just feels like the only way, and you talked about this, the only way to live this way of therapy into the world is through apprenticeship. It's through actually a personal relationship. And yet, as therapists, like, almost all of our trainings are done in mass. And I just wonder if you have any wisdom for us as we're young and will come into age over the next 40 years, how we can shift or transform the way this stuff is done, where it is so focused on methodology and protocol and technique. And yeah, if you have anything to say about that. And I also just feel so grateful for you, because if it wasn't for the way you do your work and how that influenced Bruce Sanguine, like, I would have gone to a very dark and fractured place for the rest of my life, because that's the path I was on before I was actually touched by love by another human who was. So I just see the gravity of this like, we need to shift, like, in our field there needs to be a shift toward more personal.
Well, I thought about, there's a system. I think there are 3 temperaments that I can think of. There are those who can work within the system. They're very patient, like, work within the system, work in a clinic, work in a hospital, deal with psychiatrists, psychologists, and still slowly try to change how people think. It's not my temperament. Like the Yukobors here in Canada, who dynamited power lines, burnt down schools, the women naked paraded around City Hall to protest what the Canadian government did to their children. That's not my temperament, to try to destroy the system. So I can't work within the system. I'm not interested in throwing bombs and dismantle the system. So my temperament is what I would call small-scale strategy, where in some limited way I have found a niche, sort of where the system lets me be. I don't have to struggle with it. And I do what I want and I don't do what I don't want. I do it my way. And hoping that when the system will go bankrupt, people will be looking for alternatives. And then I can say, I've been doing this for 40 years and it works. Hello, why don't you try it now that the system went belly up? So that's my temperament. So if I don't know what your temperaments are, but you have to do something that fits with that. You know? And hope that you find a way to be able to do that. The apprenticeship is difficult these days. I mean, it's difficult at the best of times. That's why I was very fortunate in London at the Philadelphia Association, because they had 7 households where people could live together who otherwise would have been hospitalized in psych wards. Laing told me that when he was a medical student and doing psychiatric interning, he asked his professors a very simple question, which is, what happens to someone you have labeled schizophrenic who is not treated? Because diagnosis in psychiatry and medicine is really to, after you diagnose, you know what to do with them. So there's a treatment plan, and there is outcomes, so he said, which I think is a good question, like, you know, if suddenly they diagnose me with cancer, my first question would be, what would I look forward to if I refuse treatment? It's a perfectly reasonable question. You know, like with prostate cancer, for example, I got the answer that it can easily metastasize into bone cancer, and bone cancer is very painful. Well, okay, then I'll decide that. But if it would have been, well, you die quietly and nicely, I may not have chosen any intervention. So it's good to know what would happen if the person receives no treatment. Not one of his professors, not one of his teachers had any idea of what would happen to somebody who is diagnosed schizophrenic and didn't receive treatment, because as soon as you diagnose somebody, you treat them with horrendous medication, which then determines, the person won't know that if they feel badly, whether it's because of their schizophrenia or whether the drugs they receive. So Laing wanted to know what happens to people if they don't get any treatment. So there were 7 households where people lived without any treatment, and they coexisted. And I was there when the therapists, when Laing and another Scottish psychiatrist and a couple of other people mingled and lived with these people, and what a community could do. In the community, apprenticeship was built in, because I just had to hang out there and everything was happening around me. You know, there was one guy who tied a turkey, like a turkey carcass to his head and was walking around with that. And another guy was powdering his genitals and then dressed up in 7 overcoats because he was afraid somebody would shoot him in his genitals. Like, and what did the doctors do with these people, and what happened, and how did they interact, and so on. So it was very good to be convinced that doing nothing works. Because otherwise it's hearsay, and you don't have the lived experience. So I probably wouldn't have had the courage to develop how I work if I wouldn't have seen it work. So that's why I think apprenticeship is important. So, all I can say is seek out old people who are not dead yet and see what you can do with them. Also, it's not easy because, for example, people I work with, I can't just say, come in and watch what I do because it's intimate. How Laing solved it for me was that he asked people for their initial interview when they had no relationship yet, can my students sit in? So I sat in for initial interviews that he had with people. And then usually at the end of the session, he would say, well, I'm too busy, but Andrew will work with you. And so then he knew who I was talking about in my supervision because he sat with them. He was there at the first, from the beginning. And so that was a very good arrangement. Even that's hard to get these days. Yeah. But it doesn't mean that there is any other way. Except, invent it between yourselves.
True. Maybe. Regression,
yeah,
or
let's
do you
talk
want to?
for maybe a couple more minutes and then let's wrap up.
Couple minutes on regression?
Never.
Yeah, Jeremy, you got.
Yeah.
What's your question now?
Well, I'm just curious. I noticed that on MDMA that the difference between being with someone who was just doing music, right, and trying to control, and how awful. And you could be on MDMA, which is supposed to be heart opening, and be absolutely crushed. And then with somebody who, Bruce, who was here, and it seems that part of that experience, I haven't actually done LSD, is regression, and that regression is important for as part of therapy. I'm just curious what you think about the role of regression and how we be with regression in psychotherapy.
Well, it's one thing to want somebody to regress and another to be with someone who is regressing. Like, I wouldn't want to induce it. It's not I really want nothing from my patients. I have no idea. I wouldn't want them to regress. I don't say regression is good. If you're regressing, then I'll be with you. And I can sense that although you look like an adult, you're actually feeling and acting like a kid. And even then, there are people who are willful and they want to regress, but they're not regressed. So even that, I can feel in my body who I am with. If the reaction called forth from me is kind of maternal and gentle, as if I were with a little kid, I know the person is regressed. If I want to shake them and kick them, I know they are willful, and they just looks like they are regressing, but they're not. They're manipulating. So, but really, even under LSD, I think I write about that, to go back to when you were hurt, you have to be careful that you don't stay there. Because what's the use of re-traumatizing yourself? What's the use of re-experiencing the whole thing? That's not the purpose. If someone is naturally going back to some awful experience, it's because probably some alarms have been set off. And the alarms have been ringing all their lives. And LSD gives an option to go there, touch on it. You don't have to re-experience it. And maybe turn off the alarm, because with one leg, you are in the safety of your relationship with the therapist. So here and now, you're okay. Then and there, you were in danger. And so the aim is to go back and forth, to regress progress, regress progress. Just regressing is useless. But if you regress progress, then hopefully you kind of release where you have been nailed. Because if you're nailed in some undigestible experience, some frozen terror, then something is always pulling you back, and you can never be fully present because something is pulling you back. And under LSD, with the help of a good therapist, you can pull out the nail and turn off the alarm and come here, and then finally you're together. Marcel Duchamp has a painting, Woman Descending Staircase. It was one of the first paintings in art history where motion was being able to portrayed in a still painting. And how he has it is the woman's bum is at the top of the staircase and her tits are down at the bottom. And she's kind of spread out like an accordion. You know, and so you can see that woman is descending staircase, but she's kind of pulled out. So I think there are many people who come into therapy like that their front is grown up, but their tail is nailed somewhere in some horrendous experience in the past, single or continuous, like coming out of a very bad family. So, you know, for the front to wait for the back to close up and not be stretched out anymore is an enormous relief. And sometimes that can happen. So like one is stretched out in time and there's a pull towards the past. So if that's resolved, then there is no pull. You can be fully present. And that's something.